This is the Change Physician Podcast, episode 96, take one.
Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my fabulous and amazing co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady. Melissa, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Obviously working on my little signage.
Your signage? Well, and obviously we've been out and enjoying the great outdoors and
yes,
doing fun things.
Very casual today. Please forgive my lack of makeup and just was sweating outside.
Well, we like casual. Casual's good. We're a fun podcast. We're not like
right.
We don't come in
not stuffy.
Yeah, we're not the stuffy podcast. But I had something I wanted to talk on this episode today. So I'm going to throw it out there and see what your thoughts were. But it was an idea that I've been working on for some time now, and in multiple different areas of my life, but has really come to fruition for the last, I'd say, month or so in my sleep. And what I mean by that is I have a history of chronic insomnia. Yeah, it started in medical school, crazy sleep schedules, a lot of stress involved with that. I did end up taking Ambien for a couple of years, and I would never recommend doing that for anybody. I don't, there's some interesting literature on those kind of sleep aids and how they don't actually really help you with your sleep. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I wanted to do was, well, what can you do? CB, cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep is like the best thing. Most of that comes down to is all organizing a sleep schedule, making sure you go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, blah, 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 good sleep habits. So I do that. But then when you kind of look at the brain science, which is us as pain specialists, that's really sort of my forte and in my joy and love is kind of looking at how the brain works and structures our reality. And what we know from neuroscience is that the more that you pay attention, or I should say, the more that you invest attention into something, it's going to grow. Mm-hmm. So from a perceptual standpoint, like once we start noticing something, it's going to click more, sort of like the Where's Waldo phenomenon. And I'm like, well, you can either pay attention, which is more of the survival-based thing, where you sort of let it get dragged to survival-based threats, see the dangers, pay attention to when things are bad. Mm-hmm. In which case, then you're like, oh my God, I slept horrible tonight. And then you focus on that. Oh my God, I can't believe how bad I slept. Versus the other thing is, how do you train your attention to support your life and your experiences in such a way that is more positive? So we're going beyond the survival aspect, which was important. Mm-hmm. It's important when you're out in the jungle or if saber-toothed tigers are going to attack you. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to move into that thriving aspect, it really requires you to start investing, meaning thinking downstream and doing the activities that support those downstream interactions and future kind of perceptual shifts. So I'm like, well, how do we then invest attention on what we want? And for the sleep aspect was, we're going to invest attention rather than pay attention to those moments of time when I had bad sleep, is to invest attention into the nights I have good sleep. So making that conscious effort of when I wake up in the morning, it's like, holy crap, that was so awesome. Mm-hmm. Make that more of a ritual. And what I did, I have a big wall calendar. I kind of use anything I'm doing for the year. I kind of mark it on it. And what I've started to do is wake up in the morning. If I feel like I had great sleep, put a big green sleep circle around the night. And I write in big green letters with a exclamation point saying, great sleep last night, something that kind of provides a little joy. And holy crap, if it doesn't start to create this chain reaction. And, so obviously if we're going to be real formal, we'd need like a formal study and we do all this stuff. Sure. But anecdotally, and that's what most important for me because I'm benefiting from it right now, it just all of a sudden starts to build. And so I want to bring that up because so often what happens to us, in particular in medicine, is we pay attention to all the bad stuff. Mm-hmm. And that makes sense at the time. But really, if you want to create change, which is what this podcast is about, is start to actively then invest attention into the things that matter to you. Mm-hmm. So not put them on the back burner, but saying, if you want to pay attention to your retirement accounts, the best thing to do it is to actually then pay yourself first and invest that attention into monitoring those dollars. Like literally, you set up your accounts, you put in your dollar amounts, and then you track it. We started doing that about 10 to 15 years ago. And literally by just doing one little thing, all of a sudden you start watching this thing grow because it's at the tip of your mind, whether it's a health habit. If you want to, and for me, it was improved sleep. Maybe for you, it's You want to start exercising more. Well, pay attention, or I should say, invest attention into how you feel after a great workout. And even in relationships, did you have a great interaction with your spouse or loved one today, or with your kids? Start tracking those wonderful interactions rather than paying attention to the negatives, like when you fought with somebody. And it's a small, subtle shift. People may say it's kind of ridiculous, but there's some neuroscience behind it. And it's just is really kind of changed. Like once I started applying it, it's just exciting because now I'm starting to look at different areas of where else can I choose to invest my attention rather than be reactionary and simply pay attention to the negatives.
Yeah. Well, I took a few notes. I was getting all these ideas like, I'm going to forget all these things. But like the savoring the positives things, I like so much of like the neuroscience and how from a survival standpoint, there's a reason why we hold on to certain memories that were traumatic and difficult or challenging. Technically your body, your system wants to learn from them, and sometimes it sabotages us in life later if it's not constructively utilized. Unfortunately, sometimes I think there's a lot of subconscious stuff too that we're not going to tap into, but I'm sure there's a lot that can go on there that they try to make sense of, but there's definitely so much more than just the cognitive that can impact our reaction. And so when you started saying all these savoring the positive, you realize it's so much easier to just focus on the negative, whether it's in your relationship. And let's go there, like literally in relationships, and obviously I'm not a relationship expert, but I've had relationships and I know that the mind you live in, like you can't run away from your mind. Like it's with you unless, you have dementia and you're not even recognizing or remembering anything anyway, or those memories aren't there. But like literally the way your perspective, the way that you're looking at the world and the types of questions you're asking yourself, or the curiosities and what you're savoring and what you said you're putting attention into, just being aware that if you shift your perspective and shift on what you're focusing on, how that can radically transform how you feel, like literally the thoughts and the feelings, and it can impact just the kind of enjoyment you get out of your relationship just by that shift itself. And you talked about like even from a financial standpoint, obviously that's important as well, but so many realms of our life that survival instinct and that negativity that's so easy to just hold on to. I find it fascinating because when you think of where fears are, where they come from, you have these negative situations or experiences, and then your future experience, because now you're fearful the thing that you didn't enjoy or it really, traumatized you from the past, it's influencing your behavior in the future. And it just makes you think about that fear is driven from those negative things and what you've been paying attention to. Now you're hypervigilant for it, and you have an underlying anxiety and possibly panic attacks that, it just seems like it's all, tied together. So, investing your time in the things that like I even had a conversation with a friend, just even mantras, if it takes a mantra to break your patterns, your negative patterns, or these, what do they call them? Automatic negative thoughts, ants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, shine your light. That was one of the things I talked about. Like anytime you're feeling, maybe not as positive, or, you're holding yourself back, like speak to yourself, like shine your light, like, the way you give to this world and can impact people in a positive way is shine your light. So I think you almost have to be intentional with the positivity portion. And you made me think of like how we avoid, like pain avoidance is a big thing in the pain world, where we're constantly trying to avoid the thing that's uncomfortable, when in actuality, if you focus on the things you love, and that there's a lot of other pain science behind all that, but it is fascinating when you focus on a positive. And I think that's what, in my world of like pain in a physical sense or challenges in life or relationships, I think the eternal optimism I always seem to have has been a blessing in so many ways, because I don't know what it is, but I've been told that I'm like this eternal optimist, which you could have another synonym for that, I'm sure. Um, but I think it served me well, because a lot of the negative things that have happened in my life, I don't, it doesn't suck me in. I think I'm always focusing on something else that's maybe it's just a survival instinct of my own, is just finding something else that's positive, and I can compartmentalize, or I can like just ignore that negative thing in my life. Um, but yeah, that was a long drawn out conversation of, I think I've naturally and also intentionally invested my time and energy into positive things, um, and try not to pay as much attention to some of the negative things.
And I think that's what you kind of see across spectrum from the population as well. Because
Yeah.
if we moved into a trauma discussion, when we're talking about early childhood adverse experiences, the ACEs stuff, and then we look into the resiliency literature, what we do know is people who have had pretty significant, horrible, awful things that occurred at a long age, and we know that there's a health-related effect with them. That's not everybody. And it's about 20% seem to be the greatest affected by those. And then there's a larger portion that come through, and I'm not going to say they come through unscathed. They
Sure.
still have something, of course, with them,
Right.
but they seem to have progressed and functioned better. Like you think about the Oprah Winfrey's and the amount of trauma that she had and how that transitioned. And then but there's multiple examples, and we've seen them who have been through similar trauma and have really not been able to escape that, kind of in that downward spiral. And I think that again comes back to is this idea of paying versus investing. Because if you think about a horrible traumatic event occurs, and what's the brain doing in that when it's activating that stress response, that survival based innate active thing that is evolutionary designed to be easy, right? Because that's how you keep the species alive, is not focusing on the good things that may provide really, great feelings and support of this or whatever, is to focus and make sure that you react so strongly to those negative things that could potentially kill you. And then flash that into your brain, burn those moments so that you have a memory, so that if you survive this in the future, if I'm in a similar situation, so now we're going to generalize those cues, because again, it's going to make more sense to generalize those safety cues than to be highly specific to, I was attacked when I was walking down this alley on 4th Street in this amount of time. Well, the likelihood of you being attacked on 4th Street ever again is low. But from a survival standpoint, if you say, hey, if I was in a dark alley in a street somewhere, these are dangerous scenarios. And now if you hear something that may bring you back to that situation, you're going to react, right? Mm-hmm. So it pulls that forward. But if we're then, so that's kind of this concept of immediate paying of attention that provides a survival benefit. The problem is later on, when we are no longer in those scenarios and now we have that hypervigilance, is if we can be aware enough to intentionally shift our attention. And that's going to take some hard work, depending on how long that old kind of entrenched, neural pattern is there. But if you're aware, and then you can set intention in advance and say, well, yeah, in social situations, maybe you got social anxiety. In social situations, I've been nervous because. But if you're aware enough that you're going into a social situation, the thing is, well, what can I invest my attention in to help me to feel safe? Because I don't like that lack of connection. Maybe you feel isolated, but you don't know how to trap out of that. Well, if I'm going to go in that social situation, because I know that's going to go well for me, I'm going to invest my attention into, maybe I'm going to go with a friend. I'm going to invest my attention on seeking familiar faces, or I'm going to invest my attention into this next step. But you have to have that awareness in order to start setting those intentions, so that you can start investing your attention into those positive interactions in a way that is meaningful and useful, and which can grow. Just like investing money, you invest it and it compounds over time. You're intentionally investing your attention into those positive aspects. Over time, that should grow with behavioral change. And I know if you're listening to this and going, what are you talking about, Dr. Cuccaro? We're sort of going through tons and tons of different kind of neuroscience and perspectives here that may sound almost either woo-woo, but there is such a wealth of neuroscience around how these perceptual shifts occur, that the science is actually catching up to a lot of these things about, finding your happy place or putting your face on the happy side. And we are not in any way repressing anything. That's a, we're not doing the old school thing of saying, well, don't air your dirty laundry and just repress it. We're not talking about that at all. All we're talking about is growing forward on what it is that you choose to invest your attention in. Which are you going to invest your attention into the positive aspects, things that you want to grow and that are meaning for you? Or are you going to pay attention to the things that are more destructive, perhaps have potentially short-term gain, are more survival based, but ultimately don't help you in the long-term kind of thriving mindset that we want?
Yeah. No, I couldn't have said any better myself, but I would say that if anything, this episode is just a reminder that, like you said, not woo woo. There's a lot of science behind it, and to remind us that, these things that are intangible, that are kind of the things that occur between these ears right here, our mind, or whole system, however you want to define it, are part of our, overall wellness and happiness and our perspective, our state of anxiety or depression, whatever it is that we're, going through. There's a lot of ways that internally you can drive your state of being in a different direction. And a lot of that requires the awareness and requires some strategic methods that are not really that complicated. It's just it's almost as if there's an inertia to shift the momentum in that direction of, like, you've been running these patterns and cycles over and over, and you don't know anything different. So, which makes me think of what the next episode should be. But any last thoughts, Kevin?
Nah, I think we can wrap it up. There's so many other discussions that can come out of this, just like all of our discussions. It makes me excited, but I'm going to hold those back so that we can kind of retain one core idea for this episode. And why don't you take us out?
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us with the Change Physician podcast. I am Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, joined by my awesome Oregonian co-host. Was that right? Oregonian?
Well, I live in Oregon. I'm more identifying with, but this is a whole nother conversation. I see myself as a Nevadan. I have a very strong.
Okay, yes.
I haven't lived in Nevada for 20 years, but I'm a 4th generation native Nevadan. I love my state. It's in my blood. So anytime people ask me, where are you from? I'm like, well, I'm from Nevada, but I live in Oregon. Sorry.
So this is where in the video I edit with the scratch of a record. Let's take this back out. This is Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my awesome co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode, but make sure to check out thechangephysician.com and make sure to subscribe, rate, comment on our podcast at any of those venues, or you can find us, of course, on Instagram or Facebook. You can even find us on LinkedIn if you like as well. So we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Take care, folks.